Good morning, children. Welcome back to Biology class, Chapter 2, Part-6, Sexual Reproduction in Flowering Plants. Last class, we have discussed about the pollination. Transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma of a flower is called pollination. That is, some of the biotic and the abiotic agents are helping for the pollination. Then we discussed about the types of pollination. First, autogamy, transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma of the same flower. These are producing in autogamy. There are two types of the flowers are producing. First one, it is the chasmogamous flowers, which are similar flowers of the other species with exposed anther and stigma. And the second type, cleistogamous flowers, which do not open at all. So these two types of the flowers are producing in some of the common plants like oxalis, viola, camelina, arachis, hypogea. In this type of pollination, the pollinating agents are absent. Then next, we discussed about the geitonogamy, transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of another flower of the same plant. Okay. Then we discussed about the synogamy or cross-pollination, transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma of different plant. This is the only type of pollination which during pollination brings genetically different types of the pollen grains to the stigma. Plants use two abiotic, wind and water, and biotic agents to achieve the pollination. Pollination by wind is called anemophily. Anemophilous flowers characters already we discussed. Pollination by water is called hydrophily. Hydrophilous flowers characters also we discussed. Today we are going to discuss about the biotic pollinating agents. Okay. Majority of plants use biotic agents for pollination. Insects, bees, butterflies, bat, moth, animals like squirrel, reptiles, etc. are the some of the biotic pollinators. Flowers of biotic pollinated plants are specifically adapted for a particular species. Now we will discuss about the insects pollinating flowers. Pollination by insects is called entomophily. Study of insects is called entomology. Pollination by insects is called entomophily. Entomophilous flowers are large, colorful, fragrance, and rich in nectar. Okay, these are, if it is a single flower, they are large flower, colorful, and they have the good smell and rich in nectar to attract the butterflies. If the flowers are small, a number of flowers are clustered into an inflorescence to make the insects conspicuous or to attract the insects. Okay, if suppose one flower, if it is not attracted with the small flower, it is not attracted with the butterflies, so they are present in a bunch of flowers. Then that flowers are attracted by the butterflies. They are brightly colored and produce large quantities of nectar. So these are the characters of the entomophilous flowers. They are brightly colored, produces large quantities of nectar. Their fragrance is present, colorful. If it is a small flower, they are present in a bunch of flowers into an inflorescence. Then we'll see that when the beetles and flies are attracted by the foul odor, unpleasant smell, that also will attract these flies. Okay. Then it is birds pollinated flowers. They are also called ornithophyly. Study of birds is called ornithology. Study of the pollination by the birds are called ornithophyly. So these flowers are pollinated flowers. Usually birds pollinated flowers usually brightly colored, having long tube-like flower parts are present inside the tube-like structure, having nectar. Thus, the birds attracted with the color and nectar visit of more flowers, birds transferring the pollen one flower to another flower. Thus, pollination will take place. Some of the pollen grains are edible also. See, listen, these the flowers of the biotic pollinated plants are specifically adapted for a particular species. So birds pollinated flowers have a long tube-like structures are present and also brightly colored, and also they have the tube-like structure contains the nectar, so that the birds are attracted and they suck the nectar from the tube-like structure. Okay, this one, the study of the birds by pollination is called ornithophyly. Now, next, the pollination by bats. Normally, that flowers are white in color because the bats can see only in the night. That the study of the pollination by bats is called chiropterophily, and pollination by the snails is called malacophily. That pollination by the animals. Pollination by animals is called zoophily. See that one? Zoology, you know that word, study of animals. Pollination by animals is called zoophily. So now entomophily, chiropterophily, zoophily, ornithophyly. So some of the plants, flowers, and to sustain the visit, they provide shelter. To sustain animal visit, the flowers have to provide shelter. How they are adapted. One example is the tallest flower, Amorphophallus flower itself about 6 feet height. That is the tallest flower. Attracting the pollinating insects, providing them a safe place to lay their eggs. The flower is very tall. Inside large space is there. Some of the moth will go inside and they lays the egg in the petals of that flower. And afterwards they are taking the pollinating pollen grains from their body. When a pollinating agent come in contact with the anther, its body gets covered with a coat of sticky pollen grains. Then this species goes to another flower to suck the nectar. Pollen present on their bodies comes in contact with that flower's stigma. That completing the process of pollination. See, listen, when a pollinating agent means any flower, they will visit pollinating agent. Now we saw that one, the different examples. Suppose if it is an animal or it is a bird or it is an insect, anything, any agent, living agent come in contact with the anther of its body, gets covered with a coat of sticky pollen grains. See that one? The pollen grains are sticky biotic agents. Then this species goes to another flower to suck the nectar. Pollen present on their bodies comes in contact with that flower stigma, thus completing the process of pollination. Similarly, a relationship exists between the species of a moth and a yucca plant. See that one, how it is. The moth deposit its eggs in the locule of the ovary of yucca parts of flower. The larvae of the moth come out of the egg, starts consuming some of the developing seeds, leaving enough of them propagating the plant. When the moth becomes mature, it comes out of the plant with the pollen grains of that yucca plant. Thus, the moth and the plant are dependent on each other for the completion of their life cycle, and the process of pollination also will take place. See that one, yucca one plant, and one type of the moth lays their eggs inside the structure of the flower of the yucca plant, and larvae will grow and taking the developing seeds from this plant, and they are not completely consuming. Some of the plants they are leaving for the next thing, and afterwards once the moth larvae will grow mature time, they are coming out with the pollen grains of this plant. Okay, and we'll go to the different plants. Pollination also will take place. There is a mutual understanding relationship also will take place, and the both the things will each other, they are connected. Life cycle to complete, both the plant also required and the moth also required for only in this plant. Their mutualism is present. So some of the characters of the entomophilus, ornithophilus, and the flowers, we saw that one. Now, see, listen. Why don't you observe some flowers in your area available to your sunflowers? Try to find out which animals visit which flowers, whether they could be pollinators. You should find out. You will have to patiently observe the flowers over a few days and at different times of the day. Not only one day, 2 days, more than 2 weeks. Observe continuously. You observe the flower and continuously observe which type the insects is coming, and regularly it is coming. Any adaptation is there, you can observe it. You could also try to see whether there is any correlation in the characteristics of a flower to the animal that visited it. Carefully observe if any of the visitors come in contact with the anthers and the stigma, as only such a visitor can bring about pollination. Many insects may consume pollen or the nectar without bringing about pollination. Such flower visitors are referred to as pollen robbers or the nectar robbers. That is a reward. When the insects will visit the flower, they are getting the reward in the form of nectar or the pollen. So both it is benefited. The flower is benefited with the pollination, and the animals are benefited with the pollen or the nectars. If pollen they are not getting, then they are known as the pollen robbers or the nectar robbers. These are the characters of some of the biotic flowering plants agents characters. Now, next we will discuss about what are the outbreeding devices. Outbreeding devices means mechanisms to prevent the self-pollination and encourage the cross-pollination. Continue with the self-pollination, it leads to the inbreeding depression. Inbreeding depression means they are the fertility, reducing the fertility. They are not getting any good varieties. Continue the same type. Instead of that, we should get the cross pollination. Through that, we'll get the genetic variations we'll get. Compared to that, how to we can do it, how to encourage that one. So what are the points? We'll see that one. Now, first point, majority of the flowering plants produce the bisexual flowers. What is the meaning of bisexual flower? Male and female reproductive structures are present. Staminate and the pistillate flowers are in the same flower. So that will continue. Self-pollination result in the inbreeding depression. So the flowering plants have evolved many devices to discourage the autogamy and to encourage the synogamy. What are the points? In some species, pollen release and stigma receptivity are not synchronized. No unity for that. The maturation of the anther and the receiving the pollen grains, there is no unity. Either the pollen is released before the stigma becomes receptive, or stigma becomes receptive much before the release of pollen. Flower in which anther mature earlier to stigma to prevent self-pollination is called proto-andry. Androecium becomes mature first. Protandry, flower in which stigma mature earlier to anther in order to prevent self-pollination is called protogyny. Gynoecium will mature first. That is called protogyny. Protoandry and protogyny. There is no synchronized. That is the first point. In second point, to encourage the cross-pollination and discourage the autogamy, the anther and stigma are placed at different positions so that the pollen cannot come in contact with the stigma of the same flower. Okay, these two also prevent the autogamy and encouraging the cross-pollination. The third device to prevent is inbreeding self-incompatibility. Self-incompatibility means pollen grains do not germinate on stigma of the same flower due to mutual inhibition. It some genetic mechanism prevents the pollen germination on the stigma. Some problems in that pollen grains. They cannot germinate their own. So they had a problem. So that was a third device to encourage the cross-pollination. Then next point, it is fourth point is the monoecious flowers, or that is the bisexual flower. The production of the unisexual flowers, both the male and female flowers are present on the same plant. Then there is a chances for the autogamy, but chances for the cross-pollination also is there. In several species such as papaya, female flowers and the male flowers are present on the different plants. That is called the dioecious condition or the unisexual plants. unisexual plants and the unisexual flowers. Male and female flowers are in the different plants. That also encouraging the cross-pollination and discouraging the autogamy. Discouraging the autogamy and encouraging the xenogamy or the cross-pollination. Thank you.